We have lots of research that tells us that when when they're looking for sources, they are often just looking for sources to support the ideas that they already have, the opinions they already have. And true research doesn't function that way. So if you're really conducting research, you start with a question that you don't know the answer to. So of course, you have ideas about what the question, about what the answer might be and why the question is important to you, but you shouldn't know the answer. And the purpose of research should be to find the answer. And you find the answer by looking at other credible sources, and then certainly by doing research yourself, asking the questions for yourself. So we've talked a little bit about how to conduct primary research. So certainly Dana Driscoll helped you with this. The article that you read about research methods that I wrote along with my colleagues Mueller and Clary Lemon touched on this as well. But to focus for a moment on secondary research, how do you find a source that's really helpful, that is credible, and that you can base your own work on? And that's really the purpose of worknets. The other thing we know from a lot of research on the research process is that many people not only do they just look for sources that support what they already believe, but they also really don't take much time with the sources that they check. So they often read them just to make sure that they support the opinions that they already had, but they often don't just really spend time carefully reading them. There's actually a really interesting study that demonstrated that a bunch of citations that students used in their papers, and this is research conducted across 4 different universities over thousands and thousands of papers. It found that all of the citations, or sorry, not all, but the majority of citations were from the first 3 pages of a research article. So that suggests that maybe people only read the first 3 pages. That's not the only possible conclusion for that finding, but it's a compelling one. So you may have found this yourself, and I've done this as well, that you just read the first couple pages of an article to see if it's useful, to see if it's interesting. But then when we get really busy with research, we often don't go beyond that. The WorkNet method, the strategy, is to allow you to have really extended, deep reading of an article, and to model that so you have the experience and try to do that with all of the research that you do. It's a hard thing to do. It's not easy, but it is the way to do responsible, effective research. So that's why we're doing it just with one source for the WorkNet essay. So to do this effectively, you do need to find a peer-reviewed scholarly source, one that cites multiple other secondary sources. So we spent a lot of time in the last couple weeks looking at how to do that, so how to do effective library research. And if you have questions about that still, that's perfectly normal, and something that you never quite finish learning about. Everyone's always learning about how to research more effectively. But if you still have some questions about how to do that basic search, certainly go ahead and email me, or you can always chat with a librarian at the MTSU library. So you can do that in person, of course. You can also do that online. So again, you do need to start out with a scholarly source, and the Dana Driscoll article is a scholarly source. It's peer-reviewed. And just a reminder, if you're not sure what peer-reviewed means, it's essentially that this person has written an article, and other scholars, other experts in his or her field have read the work, commented on it, and essentially given their stamp of approval to say, all right, this author and this article is representative of the methods and findings in our community. Of course, this doesn't mean that you can't find something that is incorrect or problematic in a peer-reviewed source, but it significantly lessens that probability. Whereas if you were just to do an internet search and find what somebody random has said about the thing you're interested about on the internet, there's a much higher likelihood that that the methods and findings are not credible and would not be agreed upon by a community of their peers. So it's a safety mechanism to filter effective research. All right, so once you have those things going for you, then you want to set up the WorkNet essay. And here I've just pulled up the article itself, and it mirrors exactly what to do for your own essay. The thing that a number of folks have mentioned is that this is something that you probably have never done, and that is purposeful. So you may have found that you sometimes end up writing the same essay over and over again, or the same kind of research essay, and that is useful to a certain extent, but it ceases to be useful, particularly in a college writing context. Writing in your life is probably not going to be it's not going to be the same over and over again, and you need to be able to be a flexible writer. The only way to grow as a writer, to be flexible, to be rhetorical, to be effective and strategic as a communicator, is to practice writing things that you've never written before. That is the way that you grow, that you change as a writer. And I know that can be a little bit scary. It can be intimidating to have to write something that you haven't had the opportunity to practice before, but you do have the opportunity to practice in this class. So all of the work that we do in the class is scaffolded, meaning that it's laid out such that one assignment that you do builds on the next. So project 2 builds on project 1. Project 3 builds on project 2, which builds on project 1. All of the readings, all of the discussion boards, all of the assignments are meant to help you be successful in the formal writing projects. So hopefully you see the links between all of those assignments. If you don't, again, always send me an email and I'm happy to talk through it with you, absolutely. And then you have this essay itself, this article, which mimics and shows you the process of developing a WorkNet. So I would say that the best thing to do is to start by actually constructing the diagrams. And they don't have to look exactly like this, but you do want to have the basic setup where for the first phase, the semantic WorkNet, which is just keywords. All you're doing is identifying keywords. You write the name of the author and the article that you've selected, put it in the center, and then as the authors recommend, you can either use an online tool that counts the words in a particular article, or you can just kind of see, based on your reading, what seems to be the most important words that you've found. And then you choose a few of those, you put them around the article, you put arrows to them or some sort of line, and there you go. You have your first phase of the WorkNet, the semantic WorkNet. And the purpose of this is to identify what seem to be the key words and phrases in the article. What do they mean? Why are they important? How do they help you do this, accomplish this deep reading of the article that the whole purpose of this essay is to bring you to? All right, the second one is, again, the bibliographic WorkNet. So this is why it's so important that you select a scholarly source that relies on other sources, because you can just go to the references section or the works cited page, the last page of the article you've read, and it should tell you what are the sources that are used to develop this essay. If there are no sources that they rely on, then it's probably not a scholarly source, and it won't be useful for this article. So that's really important. Then you find the ones that you think are either are cited most heavily or seem to be most important. Find them, ideally read them, or at least skim them or get a sense of them, and then you essentially have a lot more information about the research article that you've selected than you did previously. So it's just like if someone tells you about a restaurant that they think is really good, you can believe them, but it's much different when you actually go to the restaurant and taste the food. Maybe they'll tell you, hey, I thought this soup was the best thing I've ever had. Then you go and you have the soup and you think it's good, but you compare it to other soups you've had at other restaurants. And you think, all right, this is okay, but it's not the best soup in the world. And you have that information. So now you go back to your friend and you see their review differently because you've had the experience, the primary experience of having the soup for yourself. It's exactly the same with a research article. So in this case, Dana Driscoll, she cites Margaret Mead growing up. If you go and read Margaret Mead growing up, you'll understand it differently than just Dana Driscoll's view of it. And we did the same thing. The whole purpose of you going and reading the Dana Driscoll for yourself and reading and listening to the podcast for yourself is we cited them in this article. But once you've actually read them for yourself, then you think of them differently. You don't have to take my word for what the Dana Driscoll article is about, or you don't have to take my word for what the Becoming a Badger podcast is about. It's very different once you've experienced it on your own. All right, this next worknet is the third phase, the affinity worknet, and it's essentially just getting a sense of the author as a person. We forget sometimes that authors are people. We think that they write these scholarly sources, and sometimes, I don't know if everybody thinks this, but many students that I've come across, and many scholars, and again, just people in general, they forget that authors went to school, wrote other things, made mistakes, interacted at college, have interests outside of their writing. And it's useful to understand authors as people because it means that you can interact with them differently. And I think it can help you get a sense of being able to contribute to a scholarly conversation. So you could potentially respond to Dana Driscoll on Twitter, or you could write her an email about the work that she did and how it has influenced your work. So that's the purpose of the affinity worknet. You might also find that you have a connection. So one thing that I've had the opportunity to do in my own writing is if I look up a source, I look up an author, and then I have questions for them later, I will go email them and say, hey, I'm writing an article that draws on your work, and I'm kind of confused about how you made this particular choice. And then I can speak to them about it. All right, the last one is just kind of a playful one. It's the choric worknet. And it's just a way of making connections across time and place. So you may not find anything particularly important in this phase, but you might. So for instance, Dana Driscoll's article was written in 2011. So you can look at what else was happening in 2011, and maybe even look at the place where her work was published, what was happening in that place in 2011. This can be helpful because it might have influenced the writer, or it might have just influenced you. Sometimes if we get a sense of what was happening at a particular time, it helps us go back to that moment. So you may remember in 2011, what was I doing? I know that I was in Florida. I was taking graduate exams. So I remember that time very distinctly, and putting that sort of context on the article helps me conceive of it differently, more deeply, and again, helps in that entire approach of spending time with an article, really understanding it from multiple angles, and avoiding just the sort of distant skimming opportunity with resources. Instead, really getting to know this work. The really useful thing in particular about spending such time with a source, and a number of students mentioned that they had this experience, that once you do this, you just sit down and really dig into one particular article, it leads you to other articles and to other credible research. And that's such a wonderful opportunity in research. When you go down these various rabbit holes, some of them are helpful and some aren't. But when you get into one of these pathways that's particularly credible and successful, that can be very generative and a helpful way to approach research. A couple of logistical things that came up in questions from a few students. It is important to let us know the title of your article, and a quick reminder that if something comes from a larger source, so if it's an article, if it's a poem, if it's something that derives from a complete work, then you're going to put it in quotation marks. So usually journal articles are in quotation marks because the journal itself would be italicized. It's a complete work. A book is a complete work, so it would be italicized. A movie, again, complete work, italicized. Anything else that is derived will be in quotation marks. One other thing that came up quite a bit was the importance of time management. So a number of folks mentioned that they were a little bit confused at the end and then they just kind of ran out of time. Certainly that happens, and doing an online course, an online writing course, can really be challenging, especially in the summer when you have so many things going on. So it's just really important to make sure that you check in every day. So make sure that you have the opportunity to read every day, contribute to the discussion boards, and especially for writing projects, read the assignment prompt the day it comes out, and everything is online. So all of the assignments that you have the entire semester is already online and public, and so you can check them out. So look at those, and then if you have questions, email me in advance so that you're really clear. As soon as anything comes up, you can ask me questions, you can ask your peers questions, and you can even kind of run ideas by me. So if you need to brainstorm, we can certainly do that through email or through Skype. And do have the idea of Project 3 on the horizon, because Project 1 certainly is geared towards developing a research project. Same thing here with Project 2. You'll have more time to develop Project 3 because that is a more extensive, longer researched essay, and that's where we're headed. So do think about the connections between the work that we've been doing and get geared up for Project 3. All right, I hope that those clarifications are useful, and then if you think of anything else, always feel free to email me and make sure that everything's nice and clear. All right, if you, and don't forget, certainly, to look at the worknets essay. Again, it provides a recommendation, lots of recommendations. It has questions throughout here, and it models how to complete the worknets essay itself. All right, have a great day. Bye.